Part 2. Uncover your root and protect your fruit. Uncover. To expose, to view by removing some form of covering. As you look at your family history to see what personality traits you have inherited, you will uncover your roots and expose to view some of the positive qualities that have been passed down to you, and some of the manipulations and controls that have shaped your personality tree. By taking off the masks that you may have developed for self-preservation throughout the years, you will see yourself as God originally intended you to be. You can lay down the burdens of the past, you can throw off the covers that have hindered your progress, and you can be free to spread out your roots. Be as a tree planted by the waters, that spreadeth out her roots by the river. Jeremiah 17:8. Chapter 7. What is a personality tree? The trees in the street are old trees used to living with people, family trees that remember your grandfather's name. Throughout the Bible, the Hebrew people show a continuing interest in genealogy, family ancestry, and history. The pattern of their past played an important part in their present. They referred to themselves as from the tribe of Judah, or Reuben, or one of the other 12 tribes of Israel. The Apostle Paul often mentioned his rootstock from Benjamin. The New Testament opens with the genealogy of Christ, and in the back of study Bibles we find family trees of some of the greats of the faith. When I got married in 1953, my generation, having come out of the Depression, worked hard at forgetting our past. We were sick of old furniture and we wanted to put the pangs of poverty behind us. The word ethnic had not come into vogue, and people with obviously foreign names were changing them to Smith and Johnson. We wanted to send our European stock away and become affluent Americans. My mother and I threw out several sets of wash bowls and pitchers that reminded us of pre-plumbing days, and I'll never forget the look of unbelief that came over her as we saw a similar set on sale in an antique shop for over $100. In the last few years, there has been a renewed interest in discovering our roots. The ME generation decided me wasn't enough and turned to them. Roots became a bestseller and served as a catalyst for research of relatives. Genealogists sprouted up and the family trees began to flourish. Ethnic neighborhoods dared to label themselves, and dressing as if you had the lead in a Russian folk opera became chic. Continental cuisine was chopped up in chunks, and one buffet could easily include Turkish melon, Swedish meatballs, Armenian crackers, French bread, Belgian endive, Mexican frijoles, Irish potatoes, Spanish paella, and Hungarian goulash, followed by Italian gelati, English trifle, Danish pastries, and Oriental fortune cookies whose hidden message might as well say, "Eating this dinner may prove to be a big mistake." Cajun food is the current rage, giving casual cooks a new line of excuses for errors. The next time you forget the pour poultry until the oven is in flames, serve it proudly as blackened chicken and you'll have a hit on your hands. With all this interest in our roots, you may have already done a family tree for yourself, or perhaps you hired some certified genealogist to do tomb rubbings of your royal ancestors. For the last 20 years, I have had a family tree painted on a wall of my home. I gathered pictures of each family member and hung them on the branches framed in gold. An ancestor fitly framed is like an apple of gold. I remember at first that Fred's mother didn't have time to hunt up pictures of any of the dead relatives, so I proceeded with the artwork and created a heavily lopsided tree in the foyer full of Chapmans and McDougalls. At the first sight of this tree with bare branches on Fred's side, Mother Littauer gasped, "You didn't tell me what you were doing was going to amount to something." Within days, she had collected up a veritable heritage, including Ludwig and Louisa von Littauer, meaning from Lithuania. These new ancestors balanced out the tree which I still have in my current home. My children have grown up knowing where they came from and what each ancestor looked like. What is the difference between a family tree and a personality tree? The first has pictures and biographical research, while the latter adds up the temperament traits to the best of your ability and assumptions. I first thought up this idea when Fred's choleric mother took the personality profile and came out phlegmatic. How could a dynamic, controlling woman who was constantly seeking affirmation of how much she had done for you possibly see herself as phlegmatic? I was confused. How could a competent choleric, a superachiever who graduated from Cornell University at 19, a businesswoman whose talk and talk exhibit confidence and strength possibly come out phlegmatic? Several times she has come to hear Fred and me teach Personality Plus, and each time she scores phlegmatic. Once, when we divided the audience in 4 sections, she chose the phlegmatic group. Fred went over and said, "Mother, you are choleric. You don't belong in this group." She slammed her fist on the back of the pew in front of her and vehemently replied, "I'm here because I'm phlegmatic and this is where I'm going to stay, and you aren't going to move me." Does that sound like a phlegmatic? I remember saying to Fred, "Your mother has less idea of who she really is than anyone I've ever met." Once, she left my home to go to a grandchild's graduation where the parents were divorced. The 2 parents had predetermined there would be no controversy, but they were concerned that mother would stir something up. She attended with the conviction that she was needed as a peacemaker in case there's any trouble. How could a choleric, who would by her mere entry into a room of relaxed people, bring them to their feet, possibly think she was a peacemaker? This contrast in her behavior and her perception of herself led me to think back when I first met her. I remember standing in the Littauer library, wearing my purple knit dress with matching shoes, purple paper violets behind one ear, and a gray kidskin cape I had bought in Feline's basement for $99. By Haverhill's standards, I was put together, but I faded back a step when Mrs. Littauer came sweeping in the front door, wearing a full-length mink coat. Do you know what happens to a gray kidskin cape when it stands next to a full-length mink? It turns into what it really is, dead goats. I stood there trying to look chic and realizing I had, as my mother would say, more than met my match. From this moment on, I could see this elegant lady was firmly in control of every situation. Fred's phlegmatic father had died a few years before, and she ran the household with authority and style. Her son stood up when she entered the room, held her chair as she was seated, and ate only after she had lifted her fork. She kept everyone motivated to good deeds. She plumped pillows the moment your seat left the sofa, and she gave instructions to everyone, as if we were all in first grade. On one of my visits, I was to spend the day alone at Orienta Beach Club while everyone else went to work. I had been there several times before and knew the way. To make sure, one of her choleric expressions, Mrs. Littauer drew me a map and explained in detail what color building was on the corner at each turn and taught me the difference between north and south. I listened patiently while wondering how dumb she thought I was. As I was leaving, she called out, "Remember to turn left on the post road, not right, or you'll overshoot the club." Then she added, as I soon learned she always did, "I put my phone number on the bottom of the map for when you get lost." When any one of her sons would be driving to New York City, she would tell them how to go over and over again, even though they had been doing it since they were 16. One day, Fred and I were taking Grandpa to the city, and Mother Littauer made it very clear we should take the cross-country, not Hutchinson River. Since Fred is also part choleric, he decided to go down the Hutchinson River Parkway in spite of what she'd said. As we drove defiantly along, a patrolman pulled us over for speeding, and we were taken to the police station where Grandpa paid for the ticket. When we returned that night, Grandpa told Fred's mother about our troubles on the Hutchinson River Parkway. She immediately looked at Fred and said, "What were you doing on the Hutchinson River? I told you to take the cross-country. If you'd gone where I told you, this wouldn't have happened." Even though I didn't know about the different personalities then, I learned that if Fred's mother said turn left, I turned left. Cholerics constantly give instructions to the dummies, and they are usually right. After Fred and I were married and Mother Littauer would come to visit, I was shocked and hurt that she would dive into cleaning my house with a vengeance. Once she spent a full day on the stove, scrubbing each rod on the oven racks with Brillo. One February, when she had cleaned everything imaginable, I came home to find she had brought in all the deflated pool rafts that had been folded up on the patio for the winter, and laid them out on the kitchen counters where she was hard at work scrubbing them. I used to get so crushed at her cleaning campaigns that I would polish for weeks ahead of her arrival so there would be nothing she could find to do. She didn't seem to notice as she repolished shining shower doors. I would withdraw insulted. Once I began to understand the different personalities after 15 years of marriage, I saw Mother Littauer in a new light. A choleric person whose self-worth was wrapped up in accomplishing tasks and who couldn't relax. As I realized that, for her, work was fun and that doing nothing was a horrible waste of available manpower, I could accept her constant cleaning as her way of being a positive house guest and not as a criticism of my housekeeping. I stopped dreading her arrival and left the kitchen floor in need of a powerful waxing. The last time she cleaned the stove, I rewarded her by opening the top oven doors, which automatically put on the light, showing up the gleaming oven racks, and I placed a potted philodendron on the top shelf to draw attention to the cleanest stove in town. What a difference it makes in our attitude when we understand the other person's personality and know why they behave as they do. Now I can see how Mother could go into Howard Johnson's on a rainy day and bring the whole restaurant to attention. My shy, phlegmatic, melancholy sister-in-law, Nancy, recalls how they entered the restaurant together. Mother saw there were 2 empty seats at the counter, one at the end and one at the other. Without a moment's hesitation, she picked up a knife from the man who was already eating and clicked loudly on his glass. As all eyes turned in astonishment, Mother Littauer announced, "My daughter-in-law is a little weak and she needs me to stay beside her. Would all of you please stand up and move yourselves down one seat so we can sit together at the end of this counter?" Nancy watched in humiliation as each patron dutifully arose, shifted plates, silver, and glasses down one spot, gathered raincoats and umbrellas, and relocated without objection. As Nancy collapsed in the newly vacated seat, Mother clapped her on the back and said proudly, "I did it for you, dearie." As I thought over this choleric woman, I truly wondered whatever gave her the idea that she was a peacemaker. This question led me to a new study of the 4 personalities, taking our ancestors into consideration. What are we really like? Are some of us playing a role written early in life by other authors? Have some of us been wearing a mask for so long we think that's who we really are? What about you? Do you have an underlying doubt as to who you are? Does your mother have a confused self-concept? Is your mate in an identity crisis? Start answering these questions by tracing your family back and seeing at what point your natural personality was turned in a different direction. The Littauer Personality Tree. As I reflected on Fred's grandparents and gathered information on them, I came up with a fascinating profile. Richard Oelkers was a self-made melancholy choleric. His parents immigrated from Germany to New York, and his tailor father died when young Dick was 14. As the oldest of the family, he went to work to support the others. By long hours and extreme diligence, he fulfilled the American dream of rags to riches and never ceased to preach the work ethic. He married Maria Luisa Schissel, and together they built a successful chain of millinery stores in New York. Maria Luisa was a sanguine choleric. She wanted everything done her way, but she wanted to have fun doing it. Grandpa wanted everything done his way, but it should be serious, purposeful, and not taken lightly. I have learned that when 2 cholerics are married, they do one of 2 things. Either one puts on a phlegmatic mask and plays a submissive role, or they choose to fight. Grandpa and Grandma chose to fight. They scrapped for control constantly, but seemed to thrive on controversy, as is so typical of cholerics. Grandpa would today be called a workaholic, and Grandma was a forerunner of woman's lib. She went to business each day and had little interest in domesticity. The family joke was that Grandma's most complicated culinary achievement was 3-layered jello. Grandma's flair for glamour led her to change her name to fit the Hollywood image of the time. She went from German Maria Luisa to a French version, Marie Louise, and later hyphenated it to Marie Louise. Fred's mother was born into this feisty family and was called Pearl Louise, a compromise name that neither one of the parents really liked. Shortly thereafter, Grandpa won some money on a horse named Marita, and he had the birth certificate changed to reflect his good fortune. Grandma liked the name better, but couldn't let anyone think she had given in to Grandpa, so she always claimed she had found Marita in a romantic novel she had been reading. Later, when Fred's mother, Marita, gave birth to her first son, she named him Frederick Jerome Littauer Jr., after her husband. The grandparents went into a choleric tear and insisted the name be changed to Richard Oilkers Littauer after Grandpa. Threatened by disinheritance, the new parents hastily made the change, and it wasn't until the second son, my husband, that the phlegmatic father was allowed to name one after himself. From the time Fred's mother was 11, she ran the household. Her innate choleric nature gave her the ability to take charge and raise her young brother, but when she was in her parents' presence, she played a submissive role. It was either fight or switch. Their word was law, and they became as close to royalty as I've ever seen. When I first met the Littauer Oelkers family, I was amazed at the regal control which the grandparents had over everyone. We would all be sitting in the parlor, and Mother would look up to see Grandma making a dramatic appearance down the circular staircase. Mother would rise to her feet, gesture towards the stairs, and sing out, "The Queen is here." We would all stand and applaud as she made her entrance. Even her daytime dresses were dotted with sequins or beads, her neckline pulled low by a heavy diamond brooch, and her fingers so bejeweled she could hardly lift them for her grand gestures. What made Grandma's theatrics acceptable was her sanguine wit and an occasional wink that let us see even she knew she was an act, but it wasn't fun. As Grandma stood center stage, Grandpa lined up the grandchildren with a brief, clear message on the value of money. He would hand out quarters to each child who would kiss him. No kissy, no money. When my Lauren was little, she refused to kiss Grandpa because his face is prickly. He not only refused to give her a quarter, but he went into a sulking depression for the rest of the day. I thought back over what Mother Littauer's childhood must have been like. Grandma saying, "You will do it my way and you will enjoy it." Grandpa saying, "You will do it my way and you will not laugh about it." She had to work hard and be quietly obedient. She had to be the buffer between their choleric tempers. She had to be serious and deep for Grandpa, yet imitate the sanguine humor to keep her mother happy. I can remember a visit to the Oelkers' apartment when they were both over 90. Grandma sat at the head of the table, waving her hands heaped with diamonds at Mother, who quickly responded in a servant's attitude. Grandma, just a touch senile, kept sending for the mythical chauffeur to take her to the ball. Grandpa, disgusted with her histrionics, tried to quiet her down, an effort which only made her more anxious to leave for the ball. My husband, assuming a French accent, started charming Grandma by pretending to be the chauffeur. He kissed Grandma's hand and up on her arm while saying sweet nothings in pseudo-French. Grandma giggled like a schoolgirl and quickly fell in love with the French chauffeur. Grandma's memory at that point in her 90s lasted about 2 minutes, and she constantly asked who we were. Because of this inability to know her own children, Grandma surprised us all when Fred walked in the next morning for breakfast, and Grandma looked up with a radiant smile of recognition and exclaimed, "The French chauffeur is back." While Grandma was ever dramatic and the queen in her self-constructed castle to the very end, Grandpa was the hard pragmatist, constantly commanding the real people around him. One day, when Fred's mother was 72, she asked Grandpa if it would be all right if she went to the bank. He said, "No, you stay right here." She replied, "Certainly, Daddy dear," and didn't leave. Now let's analyze this family situation. We have a choleric daughter born of 2 choleric parents. What options do 2 or more cholerics have? Fight or submit. Grandpa and Grandma fought. Their daughter gave in and played phlegmatic. She became all things to both people. Grandma's happy servant, Grandpa's serious business partner, and a buffer between the 2 of them, as they fluctuated between romance and reality. No wonder when she analyzed herself she came out phlegmatic. She was the peacemaker, the mediator, the administrator. She had to be patient, keep her true feelings hidden, and be an all-purpose person. When she took the personality profile, she perceived herself as she was trained to be as a child. She looked at the words and resumed the daughter's role she played in her parents' lives until they died at 97 apiece. As Lana Bateman and I have observed, we have found that people usually seek out the opposite of their true temperament, even if it has been successfully masked for years. If the individual is a closet choleric, he will probably marry a gentle phlegmatic and then take over with a vengeance. The wedding ceremony is like taking the cork out of a bottle. Out shoots the natural personality which takes over in the extreme to make up for all those unnatural years under pressure. Fred's mother married a quiet, easygoing phlegmatic, the son of a wealthy silk merchant. Before long, he was brought into the old Christmas bargain bazaar, where he served dutifully under the three cholerics. Fred remembers little of his father, except that he hardly ever spoke up and didn't attend the athletic events in which Fred participated. Fred's natural temperament is melancholy choleric, like his grandfather, and the sensitive part of him was frequently hurt because as the middle child of 5, he was too young to get the privileges and too old to get the attention. Childhood movies show him crying frequently, and he was called Lala for his many tears. Every time his choleric part would try to win, he would either be ignored and thus become depressed, or thwarted and become angry. Since his family was deeply involved in a cult that worshipped happiness, both depression and anger were totally unacceptable emotions in his childhood. Frequently, he and his mother disagreed, and she always won. Her parents had always been victorious over her. Wasn't it her turn now? She once told me Fred was her worst child. He always bucked everything I told him to do. Fred tried to be himself, but that didn't work, so he put on a sanguine mask as a teenager. He became the loudest boy in every group and tried on dirty jokes for size, an effort rewarded by the nickname of Filthy Fred. He practiced fancy dives so that each time he went out on the board, everyone would look up and watch him plunge into the pool. What happens when someone tries to be something he isn't? When a serious melancholy tries to be the life of the party, people look up and say, "Who does he think he is?" The answer is, he has no idea. How many confused teens I talk to today who have no idea who they are, who have tried to be what their parents wanted, when even their parents couldn't agree on a mutual goal. How helpful it is to understand these basic personalities and know who we are. Only then is there any hope we can help our children in their insecurities. Because Fred felt emotionally neglected at home, although he was physically well provided for, he was constantly seeking attention and reading any rebuff as a rejection. He tried tears, athletic prowess, and a sanguine mask, but none brought him the love and sense of approval he longed for. When I asked why he put his sanguine mask away, he thought back for a moment and then replied, "When I realized it wasn't going over well." In his relations with his mother, nothing went over well but dutiful obedience. Since he loved her dearly and wanted to please her, he learned in his late teens to agree with her and keep his opinions to himself. He put away his choleric desire for control and played phlegmatic with his mother, who responded well to his new submissive spirit. While Fred was attending the University of Miami, his father died, and Fred was the son available to return and take over the male responsibilities of the home. In order to show compassion for his mother and avoid conflict, he continued in a peacekeeping role through college and a brief stint in the army. When I appeared on the scene just before Fred was discharged, I saw him as a strong, silent type. He was extremely respectful to his mother, always calling her "Mother dear," and I was impressed with how he put her needs before his own. I remember the weekend I went down to visit, and we had planned to go into New York City. At breakfast, Mother announced, "Fred, today you will cane 2 chairs." I had no idea what caning a chair meant, but I learned as I sat all day watching Fred pull cords through chair seats. Fred's mother's wish seemed to be his command. I expected this dutiful spirit would carry over into marriage. Had I understood the 4 basic temperaments, then I would have assumed Fred to be phlegmatic, an agreeable peacemaker, and melancholy, deep, thoughtful, and introspective, and myself to be sanguine, the life of the party, and choleric, let's get this show on the road. Surely a marriage made in heaven. For further study, thought, and action. On the next page is the Littauer half of our family tree. As you record the husband's half of your tree, first write their names under each leaf and then insert the personality combination in each leaf. If you don't know what each ancestor was, ask questions. Was he optimistic or pessimistic? Was he controlling or passive? Was he fun-loving or serious? When looking at any given project, did he want to talk about it, get to work on it, think about it, observe others doing it? By asking questions such as these, you will be able to at least guess at what each person's personality was meant to be. Copy this tree into the notebook you've been keeping. The Chapman family tree. Today we often hear the expression, "Here's where I'm coming from." Taken literally, we will all be able to understand ourselves better if we take the time to go back and find out where we're actually coming from. My father, Walter Chapman, was born in England, son of Thomas the harness maker and Maria, who died when Walter was 14, and his brother Arthur was still a small child. Thomas moved the remaining family to Exeter, New Hampshire, and my father became mother to his brother. His sanguine choleric temperament gave him the ability to take charge and the humor to make the best of difficult situations. His formal education stopped when he was 16, but his love of the English language and history and his keen sense of politics and oratory kept him a student of the mind forever. I remember as a child sitting next to the arch-shaped Zenith radio with my father as we both listened to Winston Churchill, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Alf Landon, Wendell Willkie, and James Michael Curley, the mayor of Boston who was convicted of fraud, ran for governor from jail, won the election, and pardoned himself. Although Curley's honesty was frequently in question, he was a master orator who freely quoted Shakespeare and the Bible with equal ease. At the conclusion of each Curley broadcast, Father would say, "Always listen to him, but never vote for him." On my maternal side, I remember my grandmother, Florence Ann Conrad, a phlegmatic melancholy milliner, who sighed a lot. She had married James Ellis McDougall, a choleric carriage maker. Katie Florence McDougall, my mother and their third child, was born in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, prematurely, with teeth and no fingernails, and was kept alive on the oven door which served as an incubator. When she was a few months old, the family moved to the States and continued to grow until there was Annie, Sadie, Katie, Willie, Ruthie, Jeannie, and Donnie. While Grandma baked bread, preserved pickles, stewed all the clothes by hand, and made Easter bonnets, Papa kept a tight control of his brood of children, similar to the lead in the play Life with a Father. When the 5 o'clock whistle blew on the roof of Judson's carriage factory in Merrimack, Massachusetts, the McDougall children ran from all over town to get home before Papa did or get a licking. Music was the central core of family interest. Annie wrote poetry which Sadie, the pianist and organist, set to music. Katie played both violin and cello. Willie the cornet. Ruthie and Jeannie violin. And Donnie sang Asleep in the Deep and The Lost Chord. They had their own chamber music ensemble. Sadie and Katie took advanced studies in Boston and later opened a studio together where they taught music. The recitals included an orchestra of pupils with my mother, Katie, as the conductor. Annie, Sadie, and Katie all married men about 20 years older than they were. Father images. Men who were about the same age as the girls' diminutive mother. Katie was often sickly and was so frail and consumptive at the time of her wedding that the honeymoon was scheduled for the White Mountains, where she could breathe cool, clear air. Walter, who had been a controlling adult since he was 14, became her new father and enjoyed protecting his delicate, phlegmatic, melancholy bride. By the time I was 4 and my brother James was a baby, the depression had set in and money was scarce. 4 years later, when Ron arrived, I overheard Mother ask, "Will there be enough money to feed him?" Each night when my father counted up the cash from the day's sales in our little riverside variety store, my mother would sigh and worry. Each morning at breakfast, she would start with, "Another day, another dollar." There was always another dollar when it was needed, but I grew up with the underlying fear that there might not be any money next week. Another concern I had was my mother's health. When she had to go to the doctor's, I would accompany her on the bus. My father's last words would be, "You take care of your mother, do you hear?" I heard what he said and what the doctor said as he gave me the instructions. She needs to drink half a pint of heavy cream each day to put some meat on her bones. See that she takes 3 of these pills a day for her nerves. You make sure that she does it, do you hear? Mother gagged on the heavy cream, so I whipped it up and put it on top of everything imaginable. I kept a mental record of when she took her pills and how often she ate, as I felt responsible for her health. I doted on my little brothers, protected them, helped with their homework, and represented my mother at PTA. In high school, I got on the high honor roll and desperately wanted to go to college, but there was no money, and my father felt what little might be found should be used for my brother James. Boys need more education than girls. I persuaded him I had to go. I would get a scholarship, I would work to support myself, and I would put James through afterwards. The choleric part of me loved goals and challenges, and the sanguine bounds kept me from seeing this project of putting myself and my brother through college as overwhelming. I would make it. I would have fun doing it, and I did. I carried enough credits to graduate with 3 full majors and a minor. Not only that, but I stayed on the dean's list and received honors in speech. At the same time, I performed in or directed at many plays and musicals, was on the debate team, and orated myself into becoming the best female speaker in New England colleges in 1948. My British father, who had sent me to 50-a-cent-hour elocution lessons from 4th grade on, and who had taught me to recite poetry for minstrel shows, was thrilled that I excelled in the one area where he had the greatest interest. Months before I got my degree, Dad dropped dead of a heart attack, and my cheering section was gone. This encouraging, uplifting man with his English sense of humor, this storekeeper whose personal charisma has caused customers to continue buying throughout the Depression, this father who would pat me on the back and say, "You can make it," was gone. Suddenly there was no one to play to. My grandstand was empty. I had planned to teach as far away from Haverhill as possible, but now my mother needed me at home. If my father was light to me, he was life to her. For months she languished while a family friend ran the store, and in June I moved back to those 3 little rooms behind the store. At 21, I took on a mantle of responsibility for my mother and 2 brothers. On $33 a week, I helped James through college and became mother, sister, friend, guardian, mentor, teacher to Ron. With my mother's permission, I took control of the family, and because my brothers are both sanguine, I had fun doing it. Mother slowly recovered in spite of the harsh realities of her life. She continued to run the little store while Ron and I went off to Haverhill High School together each day. When I met Fred, I was attracted to his all-American good looks and to his deep, sensitive nature. He saw me as a ray of sunshine adding sparkle to his serious style. Although we knew nothing about personalities at the time, we were attracted to our opposite strengths. We innately looked for the positive qualities we lacked in ourselves. Fred described us to his mother as 2 irregular gears which, when turning towards each other, mesh perfectly. It sounded almost poetic. Had we understood the 4 basic temperaments at that point, this is what we would have seen on the Chapman personality tree. For further study, thought, and action. Following the instructions from the Littauer half, fill in the female half of your personality tree, copy this into your notebook, and add pictures. On the Olkers branch, we trace back to 2 choleric grandparents who were attracted by each other's sanguine melancholy opposites and who enjoyed scrapping throughout their 75 married years. Since each one ran into resistance in attempts to remake the other, They unconsciously threw their choleric control and power onto their choleric child. With such an overwhelming pressure, she was forced to put on a phlegmatic mask and become against her own nature a low-key mediator and the household manager at an early age. She sought permission for each step of life when in their presence, always nodded with, "Yes, Daddy, dear," and was still seeking to please her perfectionist father up until the moment he died at 97. For social occasions, her mother insisted she be a charming hostess, and so she developed a sanguine mask to put on for company and to satisfy her mother. This sanguine mask was an asset in their church, the cult of the perpetual smile, as everyone was expected to be universally happy. They all smiled the same and talked cheerfully about the weather. It never rained on their parades. On Sundays, they would put on a happy face, turn on their infinite minds, and eliminate sin and mortal error from the earth. Their theme song was, "Pack up your troubles in an old kit bag and smile, smile, smile." Here was a lady with a confusing identity, to herself and to others, a natural choleric who had to suppress her desire to control and put on a phlegmatic mask of obedience, alternated with a sanguine mask of almost boisterous cheerfulness. What happens to a closet choleric when this person marries a phlegmatic? She takes over with a vengeance, and so Fred's mother did. Possibly, had she really been able to leave and cleave, she might have come into her own and been able to establish her inborn personality, but because her parents stayed strongly influential and they all worked together, she remained a mixed bag of tricks, shifting roles readily while in the middle of a sentence. Her repressed choleric would surge out in her raising of 5 children, instructing the maids before going off to business, and in dealing with people on a low level her brilliant abilities. Fred's melancholy caused him to pull back from her power, and when he dared put forth a choleric thought of his own, it caused conflict. His melancholy tendency towards depression caused him to don a sanguine mask during teen years in his quest for popularity, and later a phlegmatic mask to get along with his mother. Again, what happens to a closet choleric when he gets married? He takes over with a vengeance, and so Fred did. I'd been steeped in sanguine fun and games, and my choleric had been in high gear from shepherding my mother, to supporting my brothers, to stimulating my students. I gave no thought to the realities of marriage, as I expected to live happily ever after, so I was in shock when Fred announced he was putting me on a training program. It was a simple shape up or ship out approach, and I became instantly submissive on the surface while chafing underneath. Fred took off his phlegmatic mask at the wedding, although he kept it in a drawer for when his mother came for a visit, and his strong choleric control came out to join his perfectionist melancholy. He became a temperamental duplicate of his grandpa and forced me into a "yes, Fred, dear" approach. I put on a phlegmatic mask for the first time in my life. My sanguine sense of humor was no longer found funny, and any sign of choleric decision-making was considered bucking up for control. As our children were born, Fred took over the complete direction. Nothing was left to chance. Before our first arrived, Fred wrote pages of sample names, assessing their value as how each one would look on a high school diploma. Lauren Louise Littauer won. By the time of her birth, Fred had become somewhat discouraged with his training of me. My phlegmatic mask often slipped, revealing a rebellious spirit that Fred found frustrating. Lauren represented a blank page, a new life, untainted by the past, his chance to create a perfect child. His dedication to her training made my contributions superfluous, and I often felt like the proverbial fifth wheel. As the two of them became increasingly devoted to each other, I sometimes felt in the way, and when Fred and I would go into our bedroom, Lauren would sit sadly at the door awaiting Fred's return. In retrospect, I was somewhat the other woman. Both Lauren and I played phlegmatic for Fred. When I left the house, I became myself and achieved the presidency of each organization I touched. When Lauren got with her peers, she became bossy and tried to run the nursery school. When cholerics are held down at home, they will, without even knowing what they're doing, find something or someone to control. They may wear a phlegmatic mask at home, but there's a choleric will lurking underneath, waiting for any chance to take over. When Marita was born, 4-year-old Lauren, looking for a project, took her on. Lauren was a mature and competent child and always assumed responsibility beyond her years. Lauren had learned that conscientious good works impressed her father and freed me up to have fun, so she became a junior mother. Marita was bubbling and happy right from the beginning, and she became my toy, my baby bundle. Now we each had a child who served our needs, even though neither of us would have admitted this division had it been pointed out to us at that time. The next few years threw us all into a most unnatural situation as I gave birth, one after another, to 2 sons who were both fatally brain damaged. Lauren dedicated her little self to being their mother nurse, and she was broken-hearted when the first one died and the second went to a children's hospital, never to return. In those days, no one talked about depression. There were no books or seminars on handling grief, and we were of the school, the less said the better, added to my mother's favorite cliché, never air your dirty wash in public. Fred's melancholy could not allow him to think that he could be responsible for 2 imperfect sons. His choleric said, "Put it behind you and get on with life." And his religion taught, "Deny any sin, disease, or death, and smile, smile, smile." As Fred expanded his business and came home less, Lauren was deprived of her father's attention and her brother's presence. My response to depression was to run away from it to theatrical productions where I could create fairy tales on a stage where they all lived happily ever after. Neither Fred nor I spent time in self-analysis. Counseling was unheard of unless you were crazy, and we both tried to make the best of 2 excruciatingly painful losses. In our quest for activities to keep us from crying round the clock, we didn't realize that Lauren's heart was breaking. We neither discussed the baby's incurable problems or explained where each one had gone. "She's just a child, she'll get over it." She never really got over it, as she has written an impressive chapter, The Forgotten Griever, in her helpful book, What You Can Say When You Don't Know What to Say. During that period of mourning, we were all depressed in different ways. The sanguine in me could see no hope for fun at home anymore, so I went to seek diversions. The melancholy in Fred could see no hope in a family that would never be perfect, so he stayed at business where he could direct the details. The choleric Lauren had learned that no matter how hard her young self tried, she had no control over her circumstances. She had nowhere to go, and she wore a dutiful phlegmatic mask. Marita was too young to be involved in the tragic circumstances, so she remained happily above it all and became our dose of much-needed sunshine. Lauren grew up seriously, obediently, without rebellion. She was always mature beyond her years, stayed close to her father in business, and was the family's rock of dependability. What happens to a closet choleric when she gets married? She chooses a phlegmatic and takes over quickly. Because Lauren and her delightfully easygoing husband Randy had studied the different personalities before marriage and knew what they could expect from each other in both strengths and weaknesses, they have been able to accept each other realistically as they are and not try to transform each other. They now have 2 boys, Randy Jr., a melancholy choleric, and Jonathan, a sanguine choleric personality, duplicate of his Aunt Marita and perhaps a little like me. With a newly added Brian Frederick, what a challenge Lauren and Randy have to raise these 3 as they were created to be and not try to mold them into the perfect children they might want. It's time to break the cycle of cholerics being forced to wear phlegmatic masks and to train up these children in the way each one should go. Tracing my roots. While I was writing this book, Fred and I went back to my home area in Massachusetts. Our first stop on our roots trip was the McDougall home in Merrimack, where my mother was brought when she was less than a year old. Even though some new rooms had been added on the back, the frame of the house was just as it was when I got married from it in 1953. As Fred took pictures, standing at the front of the cracked cement front walk, I wandered around the side to the grape arbor where I had picked blue Concords as a child. The present owners, the Labelles, who had purchased the house from my mother in 1959, were at home and warmly invited us in. Upstairs, I stood in the front bedroom where Grandma Mac had given birth to her last 4 babies. I pictured each one in the hand-carved cradle Grandpa Mac had created that sits in my living room today. As I descended the narrow stairs to the front hall, I saw the sparkle of the square window full of colored glass, where I as a child had sat on the steps with my little brothers, trying to catch rays of color in our hands. A lump came into my throat as the setting sun danced rainbows of memories into my life. We moved into the parlor where my mother had been married by the bay window, and where I had played the wedding march on the piano, while my mother accompanied on the violin when Aunt Sadie Beatrice McDougall, in her 50s, had wed Charlie Porter, the upholsterer. Mrs. Laval reminded me that Grandma Mac had been laid out in front of that same bay window where the sisters had said their vows before the soft syllables of Reverend Loud. As I looked around this room, where as children we could only enter if we were good, it seemed strangely empty without the huge portrait of Queen Victoria that had stared sternly down upon us. The dining room was just the same, except that Aunt Sadie's piano, where she taught me and many other little ones in their scales, was missing. I could easily remember those Christmases around what could have been the same table, especially after Aunt Sadie married Charlie and he brought his sister, Carrie Bacon, for the holidays. She was both a foot doctor and a hairdresser, and I can still hear my father say, "She tries to make both ends meet." As I looked at the table, I remembered how upset my mother got when Dad encouraged Carrie to do her infamous imitation of a seagull during Christmas dinner, causing little brother Ron to laugh so hard he spit his milk out on the table. Oh, what memories flood back when we stand in the traces of former times. A visit to the Locust Grove Cemetery was a personal parade into the past. Grandma and Grandpa McDougall, the founders of our clan, their names chiseled on the same stone, with Aunt Sadie's. Behind them lay Aunt Annie with her husband Benjamin Franklin Sargent and their son James, who had been killed in the Battle of the Bulge when I was in high school. Across the way was Uncle Willie and his infant son William Jr., and a marker for Uncle Donald's baby grandson. I told Fred what I could remember of each person, and he got to know those in my family he'd never met. An added note of sadness struck both of us as we knelt by the stone of my father, Walter Chapman, 1878 to 1948, and the fresh markings of Katie F. Chapman, 1898 to 1894. That same day, we went back to Mitchell's department store, where I had my first job selling chocolates, to the defense factory where I worked one summer in a noble effort to help win the war, to Haverly High School where I attended and taught so many years ago, and to the Riverside Variety Store, now turned into apartments. As we drove away from Haverhill, Fred said, "This has been one of the most beautiful days we've ever spent together." Your personality tree. So often as young couples marry, they assume that because they are in love and are Christians, all will be well with their souls. They quote, "Love covers a multitude of sins," 1 Peter 4:8, and "Perfect love casts out fear," 1 John 4:18. The maiden marries a robust acorn and expects him to grow into a mighty oak. She'll fertilize him into strength and prune him into shape. She forgets that as the twig is bent, so will it grow. She assumes that once she transplants him into her yard, the fresh air will do him good, and he will leave behind the aroma of the little bushes he buddied up with on the old plantation. She doesn't realize that when she pots up this one sapling to take him home into her garden, she's buying a whole forest of family, parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, grandparents. He may renounce them or refuse to see them, but he can't remove their influence, for they all came out of the same package of seeds. Some may be bigger, better, or brighter, but they've got the same rootstock underneath. Since you, at your best, cannot weed out the whole heritage, even though you can clearly see the crabgrass in the other family, you would do better to research their history. Write down what you find, and recognize the repeated traits. You will then find the reasons for reactions your mate has that have nothing to do with your behavior. I used to think that if Fred had married anyone but me, he could have been happy, but as I traced back his family, I found that before he even met me, he had a melancholy personality that was predetermined to persist until he produced a perfect wife, no matter who she started out to be. If Fred had married the Proverbs 31 woman, he would have made her get up earlier than dawn, polish the gates where he sat, and stop wearing purple. I used to encourage our children to rise up and call me blessed, but only so we would present a unified front of insurrection as we mutinied against our master. Now that I've spent time pursuing Fred's predecessors and see him as a duplicate of his grandfather, I can accept that he came to me prepackaged as a pure progeny of his past, and that I'm not his problem. What a relief. As I've learned that closet cholerics, those made to play a phlegmatic role in the past, can take over their mates with a passion for producing perfection, I can see why he put me on a training program. I can let him alphabetize the spices and not take it as a weakness in me that I had basil behind salt. As Fred has examined my background of taking charge of everybody from the time I was a child, he can now accept a directive statement from me without expecting me to wrest control of his life away from him. Now that he understands how my mother unintentionally planted seeds of poverty in my mind, he can see why I seem to be preoccupied with ready cash. There are two major reasons for taking the time to plot out your personality trees. You'll see where you've all come from and why you are the way you are. Then you'll be aware of what you're passing on to your children when you have no understanding of their individual needs or personality profiles. In the process of researching these forebears, you may get acquainted with some fascinating faces of the past who step into the reality of your present. As you look at our completed tree, do you see how Grandma and Grandpa Oelkers were the same personality pattern as Fred and me? How Fred's mother, Fred, and Lauren had the same traits and as cholerics were forced into unnatural submissive roles? Do you see how the three of them before marriage and me after marriage had to wear phlegmatic masks for survival? Do you see how easily we fall into raising our children as we want them to be according to our personalities instead of helping them develop their own unique God-given abilities? Fred's mother didn't have a chance to be herself. She was a natural choleric with a touch of melancholy depth, forced to wear a phlegmatic mask for her father and a sanguine one for her mother. I had personally felt there was little hope of ever understanding her, but that was before two things happened. Fred and I committed our lives to the Lord Jesus, and we plunged into a personality study of ourselves, trying to restore our lost years that the locusts had eaten. We stopped attending the cult of the perpetual smile, where the whole church was a grand masquerade. We'd been so disillusioned when our sons had not been healed by their religious practices and had been told it was all my fault. These babies are perfectly healthy, and the error is in your mind. When you can see them as whole, they will be whole. It had been hard to pretend that my convulsive babies were normal and to force a smile on Sundays, so I was relieved to attend a church where I didn't have to play charades and where God's word was preached clearly. One Sunday evening, when Fred's mother was visiting, the pastor gave an altar call, and our family was stunned as Mother pushed past us in the pew, walking up the aisle and committed her life to the Lord Jesus. As the Lord began to work in her heart, she needed her masks less and less, and she allowed herself to reveal the realities she'd hidden, even from herself. I found we had something sincere to talk about, and as we both changed for the better, we were drawn together in a mutual open-heart operation. What a blessed opportunity you have right now to examine your family background for a cushion of knowledge and then prayerfully seek God's wisdom. Open your eyes and view the vision that He has in mind for your children so that you won't be guilty of changing His plans. What happens when we try to change other people? Even if we're successful and get a choleric so under control he appears phlegmatic, or a melancholy forcing big smiles to appear sanguine, or a phlegmatic exhausting himself trying to run up mountains, or a sanguine following charts so closely he has no fun anymore. What if we are successful? What do we have on our hands? A person who has no idea who he really is. It's like crossing a poodle with a schnauzer. The puppy's cute, but what is it? For further study, thought, and action. God created each one of us as individuals with different personalities, strengths, and weaknesses. If he'd wanted us to be alike, he could have created us that way. Since he didn't, our job is 1. To find out what our natural personality is and who we really are so we can function at our maximum ability, and 2. To make sure we're not changing our children into confused mongrels. Before reading further, stop and think about your family background. Join your two halves together and fill out your personality tree. How I wish I'd done this years ago before my father and Fred's father were gone, taking with them the knowledge of their parents. You will be amazed as you question grandparents and older aunts and uncles at how much you can learn about family personalities, and how much they will love you for caring enough to ask. As you're filling in the different temperament combinations, your eyes may be opened as to why your mate is one way with you and a different personality with his mother, or one way at home and one way at work. You may see repetitions in succeeding generations and become aware of masks that some have worn based on their parents' personalities or extraneous circumstances. Try to find your original God-given temperament pattern, for we can only function in our fullest capacity when we know who we really are. Put your complete tree in your personality notebook. In the process of digging up information from your personality tree, you may want to take a trip back to your hometowns as Fred and I did while I was writing this book. Take pictures of significant landmarks and include these in your notebook for the enjoyment of your family. You may even want to organize a family reunion. Be creative. My sister-in-law, Katie, designed t-shirts for her Tharp family reunion. On the front of each shirt, she put the individual's name, and on the back, she put a silk screen of the entire family tree. On the first night of the reunion, she gave each member of the family his or her own personalized family tree t-shirt. Chapter 8. What are your children's personalities? This education forms the common mind, just as a twig is bent, the tree is inclined. As I have taught Personality Plus over the years, some of the most gratifying results have come when parents suddenly realize why they haven't been able to understand a certain child. One couple came up to me and said, "You have just saved our child's life." The father, a choleric, then explained his problem with what was obviously a phlegmatic boy. "I just can't get him moving. No matter how I bribe him or threaten him, he just won't jump. This morning on the way to the seminar, I said to my wife, that kid has got to shape up or I'm going to kill him. I've always had prep and ambition, and this kid is never going to make it." The melancholy mother added, "He's really a sweet boy. He never gives us a moment's trouble, and everyone loves him but us. Now that I see he is phlegmatic and we have been trying to make him choleric like his father, and that's not going to work, I feel so guilty." The father added, "I really thought there was something wrong with him, but I now see he's just different from me, and that's okay. You saved the boy's life." How many fathers are there like this man who assumed his son would be like him, and when he didn't perform, let him know how disappointed he was? Without an understanding of the temperaments, we assume everyone ought to function as we do, and when they don't, we abandon them emotionally and give our attention to the one who fulfills our image of what a child should be. Another couple came up to me to discuss their 12-year-old twin sons. One was a melancholy and one a sanguine. They had shared the same bedroom since they were born, and had been in the same school class each year. The melancholy boy was a serious, good student, well-behaved, and kept his half of the room neat. His parents both complimented him in front of the brother, and then they would admonish the sanguine by saying, "Why aren't you like your brother?" The boy got the same comment from the teachers, as he seldom did his homework on time and talked when he was supposed to be quiet. His parents looked at his popularity as a negative, since he tied up the phone, and the teachers didn't find his spontaneous humor to be funny, but a class distraction. Because no one understood the boy's temperament, he was constantly the bad guy, and one day he came home from school and went berserk. He pulled the sheets off the brother's bed, emptied all the drawers onto the floor, and pulled the drapes, fixtures, and all off the walls. When his mother yelled at him to stop wrecking the room, he lunged at her and pushed her to the floor. He ran wildly through the house as she called the police, who came and strapped his hands behind his back and took him off to the mental ward. As the mother told me this sad story, the boy was still in the hospital where he was being tranquilized and counseled by a melancholy therapist who was trying to make him perfect like his brother. The mother cried as she realized what they had all done to this sanguine child who just wanted to have fun and instead was laden with guilt that he was never going to be good enough for his parents' approval. Unfortunately, this boy is not an isolated case. According to the data compiled by the House Select Committee on Children, Youth and Families admissions to inpatient psychiatric services of children under 18 more than doubled between 1970 and 1980. Between 1980 and 1984, adolescent admissions to private psychiatric hospitals increased more than 350%. The use of drugs at a young age and early sexual promiscuity account for many of the teen problems and are situations which were not heard of 20 years ago, but the majority of the young patients are under treatment for general depression. Ralph Alsop, an Atlanta psychologist, reports that teenagers he sees feel helpless, not in control of their lives. Their support structures are falling away. As I have talked with depressed teens, some who have attempted suicide, they all indicate a vague feeling of not knowing what's wrong with them, and they seem to have no sense of who they are. While I am not so naive as to think a knowledge of the temperaments would solve the problems of troubled youth today, I do know from my own family experience and the hundreds of other families I've counseled over the years that when they will take the time to sit down as a family and check off the profile together, there will be a positive result. Possibly, if we sat down and played a national game of Monopoly, family love would also improve. But I know if we were able to discuss in a non-judgmental manner the strengths and weaknesses of each family member and let them see their uniqueness, we would not have so many young people wandering around wondering who they are trying to find themselves. Why don't we Christian families make it a point to develop each child according to his talents and temperament? Doesn't Proverbs 22:6 tell us to train up a child in the way he should go? Italics mine. Not in the way we dreamed up. What guidelines do we have available by which to measure their abilities? Do we have to take them to a psychiatrist? Dr. Judith Wallerstein, speaking about adolescent insecurities on the Good Morning America television show, said, "They are in so many changes, physically and emotionally, that they desperately need coherent rules and family stability." As Fred and I ask our children what was meaningful to them in our bringing them up, they mentioned the family meetings where we set the rules of operation for the family. They will admit they were a little apprehensive about what new standards would be set each time, but there was a feeling of security in knowing there were some accepted standards. Understanding their personal abilities and temperaments was the other major plus they remember. I had always assumed that since education was such a high priority for Fred and me that my children would all go to college. Since I worked literally night and day to get myself through college when there was no money available, I knew my children, without the struggle, would be excited to go. Lauren followed what I felt was a normal program. She got excellent grades in high school and majored in business and psychology at Cal State San Bernardino. She married a brilliant numismatist and is raising 3 boys, 3 little Briggs. Her choleric nature with a secondary in melancholy has made her both capable and sensitive to others. She helps her husband with his stamp and coin gallery, has been on the stage since I put her in a Christmas play at the age of 4, and is both a speaker and author of a most helpful book, What You Can Say When You Don't Know What to Say. Had I stopped with Lauren, I might have been a little smug about my motherhood abilities. Having sanguine choleric Marita, who was going to do things her way right from the beginning, showed me differently. While Lauren wanted me to be room mother, Marita tried to keep me away from school. Mischievous would have been a mild term for Marita. One night, when I was prepared to go to PTA in her junior year of high school, She suggested I stay home as I looked so tired and needed rest. Since she was right, I almost fell for her ruse, but a flood of good sense came over me and I pulled myself together and went. When I arrived in algebra, the teacher said she did all right when she came, but somehow his class frequently interfered with her lunch at McDonald's. The typing teacher suggested she drop the course, and the French teacher said she couldn't keep her quiet. Only in scuba diving, where she was the only girl in a class of boys, was the male teacher enthusiastic. However, I wasn't sure she was good enough to make a living scuba diving. Had I not known her temperament pattern and been assured of her basic intelligence, I would have been a wreck trying to get her through school. But since I knew she could achieve anything she wanted to do and could charm her way through the rest, I didn't waste much time in worry. I was amazed when the guidance counselor phoned me in Marita's senior year of high school. I assumed Marita was going to be reprimanded for cutting too many classes, but instead the counselor said Marita was so far ahead of the others that they were going to graduate her early. Right then, I knew the whole educational system was in trouble. Instead of going to Vassar or Radcliffe or Westmont or Biola, Marita went to the local junior college, started her own business at 18, traveled with me learning to be a speaker, and now is a full-time Christian speaker and on our class staff. I'm so grateful that I did not try to push her into a perfect child mold. Instead, I encouraged the talents she had in verbal skills and didn't worry about college degrees. Young Fred never liked school, and even though he went away to college for 1 year, he left to come back and take over his father's car business. He likes cars and cares little for books. He is a deeply sensitive melancholy and has never moved as fast as Fred and I would have liked, but we have accepted his choices, encouraged his strengths, and praised his sweet spirit. 2 years ago, when I went on a speaking tour through Europe, I took young Fred along. There was a girl who followed me around, taking my picture whenever I was in a somewhat ungainly position. One day she said to me, "Your son sure loves you a lot." She then told me that the day before on the bus I had fallen asleep with my head against the window. She had thought a picture in this position would be humorous, so she had focused on me from across the aisle. As she was peering through the lens, a dark shadow filled the square, and she looked up to see young Fred leaning across in front of me. He asked, "What are you planning to do?" She replied, "I'm going to take a picture of your mother asleep." He stated, "No, you're not. You will never take a picture of my mother without asking her permission first." The girl had been stopped in her little tracks, and Fred didn't move until she had put the camera away. He never mentioned what he'd done, but she didn't take any more pictures of me without asking me first. There may be some mothers with sons who have gone to Harvard or Stanford or Yale, but I doubt they have ever been touched so deeply by the loving protection of their young man as I was by Fred's. We have learned in our family to train up our children in the way each one of them should go, according to their abilities and temperament, even if it was not always what we originally had in our minds. How many young people I talk to who have been pushed into schools or careers where they didn't want to be, have socialized with the right people at the right club, even married the catch of the town, and yet have never had an independent thought of their own, and are miserable. In the other direction, how many parents have let their young men and women do their own thing with so little guidance or encouragement that they are still wandering aimlessly in life, not having quite settled on anything? We are to train them up, guide them, love them, discipline them, but in the way they should go according to their own personality traits. We will never regret the time we spend with each child, showing him his unique strengths that may be nothing like those of his brother, and making him aware of his weaknesses, so he will know what he needs to overcome to be his own brand of success in life. Lana Bateman remembers the first time she heard Haddon Robinson, Dean of Homiletics at Dallas Theological Seminary, explain this verse. He said that the original Hebrew was more literally translated, "Train up a child according to his way." It wasn't until I understood the temperaments that I began to realize what this verse really meant. Did every child have a particular way to be raised? Did that mean that all children should not be treated the same way? Within the confines of my childhood family, there was a certain pride taken in the fact that all 3 children were treated and raised the same way, I'm afraid that most parents feel this attitude is the fair and correct one for raising more than one child. What a tragedy! For if the words of this proverb are true, then each child has a certain bend which makes him or her different from each other child in the family. This unique being would require a special understanding in order to draw each one to his or her greatest potential for living a wise and full life. We as parents have an obligation and duty before God to discern the way of each child and endeavor to maximize the strengths and diminish weaknesses in the most loving way possible. With an understanding of the temperaments, we have tools readily available. Kathy Stout of Austin, Texas, wrote me the following after hearing me teach about the temperaments. Each of my 3 teenagers and husband, only one of him, evaluated themselves and then each other. This was used as a great tool for family discussion. The TV actually went off before 10:30, as we looked at our strengths and weaknesses. It led into our nightly family devotions and prayer. Out of our strengths, we were able to praise and thank the Lord for the gifts and abilities He created us with. We reaffirmed our commitment to give back to Him what He's given to us, for His honor and glory and His use. And out of our weaknesses, we could see where improvement was needed in each of us. Debbie Laurie of El Toro, California, wrote me the results of her teaching her 2 children, 11 and 14, to understand the temperaments. They never ceased to be a daily help. One day, our kids figured out the first family. Eve was a definite sanguine. She talked to anyone, even a snake. Adam was phlegmatic. When it came time to make the important decision whether to eat or not to eat, he let Eve influence him. She was much better at decisions anyway. Abel was melancholy. He made the perfect sacrifices, and that garden was so tidy and precise. Cain, the choleric, got so mad at his brother he decided to take matters into his own hands. He felt the end justified the means. And there we have it, the birth of the 4 personality types. Who knows what kind of a discussion your family may have, but it will surely be better than the TV. Your child's temperament. Although you probably understand the basics of the temperaments by now, let's apply the principles as they relate to children and see what we can learn about training our children in the way they should go. We must realize first that young children grasp love in 2 ways. One is physical, touching, hugging, kissing, and affirming, and the other is verbal communication, given by parents who take the time to get to know their children and listen to what they're saying. I remember when Marita was first reading books and she would want to tell me the story. She would follow me all over the house, and the book review was longer than it took to read the book. When I would stop, sit down, and listen, the review would be much shorter, but as I kept moving, the review kept going. She could make the cat in the hat sound like Gone with the Wind. A child who does not have the warm physical touch of a loving parent and the open communication that child desires will grow up with a deep, unfulfilled longing for love and may end up looking for love in all the wrong places. Beyond this universal need for love in each child, there is a personality need. Understanding the temperaments gives us a special grasp of the particular way or need of each child. As a twig is bent, the tree will grow. Is this true? Let's take a look at some twig benders and let you decide for yourself. Sanguine. Your lively, bright-eyed, sanguine child is full of curiosity and laughter. He may not always have an audience, but that never seems to stop the constant chatter, which is the first step toward that center stage personality. This child is full of wonderful creative ideas, but is often defeated in carrying them out by a short attention span, which keeps this child from doing as well as others academically. He will, however, excitedly strive to be in any production the class has to offer, from singing to playing the bird whistle in the rhythm band. Education takes a backseat to more important pursuits such as cheerleading, drama class, student council, dancing lessons, or anything else that will provide an escape from the books. Look for this child to come up with endless excuses when facing confrontation, not because of the need for peace, which is the phlegmatic's reason for avoiding conflict, but because of his deep need to be accepted. Your disappointment or anger spells rejection to this temperament and is to be avoided no matter how many excuses the child makes. Popularity is an overwhelming need for this boy or girl. The lack of it can cause a great deal of pain and frustration, for there is no other temperament that needs social acceptance as badly as this one. Because of this need, the sanguine child is the most likely to go along with the crowd or be drawn in an unwise situation. If he is a sanguine choleric, he will be more bossy and organized. If he is a sanguine phlegmatic, he'll have fun but never get his act together and not even care. Tools to help. 1. Have the child tested at a children's learning center or with a child psychologist to determine the area of creativity and aptitude. 2. Encourage this child in the areas of performance, singing, dancing, acting, speaking, art, design, sports, scouts, or group play. This child is very active and needs something exciting going on every minute. Because of a short attention span, this child will have some difficulty with those pursuits, such as piano, that require practice and will need an adult to sit with him on the bench in order to give him constant encouragement and approval. Unfortunately, he will only do well if the duty can be made into a game, for only with the prize ahead will the sanguine child keep pressing toward the goal. In some cases, simple peer approval will suffice, but if the parent desires a final accomplishment, he will probably need to hang in there with the child to produce results. 3. The parent of a sanguine child must carefully weigh the wisdom of allowing each activity, keeping in mind this child's deep need for acceptance and knowing they always want to do what everybody is doing. You can be encouraged by knowing if you don't let them go to some event, they will soon forget and not hold grudges or sulk long. 4. This child has a greater need for physical attention than any of the other temperaments, so parents need to do a lot of hugging, holding, and touching. 5. Start early to teach this child the discipline of a clean room and the importance of handling money wisely. Understand that you will have to stay right with this offspring to guarantee any kind of results. Without such a commitment from the parents, this child can easily slip into irresponsibility and never quite grow up. 6. Understand that when your sanguine child tells a fib, it is out of a deep need for approval. Find other healthy ways to give that approval as you deal with this problem and praise them for telling the truth. Some of their colorful stories get such attention that they begin to believe what they're saying. 7. Find at least one thing your sanguine child can do well, and then encourage, encourage, encourage. Sanguines have the greatest potential, but often fall far short of the mark when parents don't understand their needs. 8. Remember that a sanguine child will do more through one word of encouragement than he will ever accomplish through your yelling, criticizing, or constant spanking. 9. Don't foster negative behavior by telling everyone how cute she was when she did it. Marita used to take money from my purse and then go down the hill behind our house and buy me a plant from the florist. She was so adorable bringing me presents that I would praise her for thinking of me. Suddenly I realized I was promoting stealing as long as she spent the money on me. Remember, virtually every move this child makes is based upon a desire to have fun and a driving need for approval, with a deep sensitivity to even the slightest possibility of rejection. The sanguine child must be a part of the gang, whoever the gang is today. Melancholy. Your melancholy baby came into the world with intensity written all over his face. When we adopted Fred, the caseworker said, "He lies quietly in the crib analyzing everyone who goes by." This is that special infant of whom everyone says, "Doesn't he look intelligent? Are you sure he's not a big person in a little person's body?" Intensity is a word that cannot be overworked, for this little one feels, thinks, reacts, responds, and reflects everything deeply. In Parade magazine, there was an article, "When Your Baby Seems Depressed." The author, Susan Lapinski, described a perfect melancholy baby and pointed out how parents with what appears to be a depressed baby feel they must have done something wrong. They assume the baby doesn't like them and they don't know what to do. The goal of the therapist is to help parents avoid a buildup of problems that can send a whole family into worry and despair. These problems usually spring from an inability to understand and cope with a baby's puzzling temperament. Throughout the article, health professionals describe the melancholy baby, but without ever using the term or explaining why some children are so different. They suggest that parents not blame themselves, but concentrate on respecting the baby's individual personality and on reacting appropriately to the baby's responses. Even though the depressed babies they describe are not compared with the sanguine, bubbly, choleric, demanding, or phlegmatic, passive, Dr. T. Barry Brazelton of Children's Hospital, Boston, does conclude, babies are competent little numbers. They can tell you a lot. And when you can spot the differences in your baby and value them, being a parent becomes a lot more rewarding and a lot more fun. He's right, and that's why it's so important that we know all the types so we won't think we've got only the unusual baby in town. Of all the temperaments, the melancholy is the most deeply creative and genius-prone. Some parents may actually feel threatened by the innate mental capacities of such a child. Sadly, the melancholy child cannot grasp why no one else seems to experience such depth of emotion and understanding, why no one else seems to care. In early childhood, your melancholy boy or girl will cling most closely to you and will have the greatest need to have parents physically present. This temperament can be damaged by neglect or abuse during childhood more than any other personality due to his deep sensitivity and propensity to withdraw when he really wants to reach out. Through Lana Bateman's counseling and Philippian ministries, she notes that many alcoholics, drug addicts, and homosexuals appear to be of the melancholy temperament. It isn't difficult to understand why when we think of how easy it is to wound or scar such gentle, sensitive children, and how their insecurities make them vulnerable to outside substances which offer to give them confidence or relieve their depression. The intelligent melancholy offspring will seldom need prodding, for he will be a good student with very high standards. If your child is heavily melancholy, you will find he has a deep need for perfection in many areas of his life. If he is melancholy with choleric, he will be meticulous about his desk and paperwork, and be more outgoing and bold than a straight melancholy. One 4-year-old melancholy choleric girl was driving her mother crazy, and the mother said in exasperation, "Don't be such a perfectionist." The child responded quickly, "I'm not a perfectionist. I just want things done right." If he is melancholy phlegmatic, he will not care quite so much whether things are in order and will be less compulsive about getting life pulled together perfectly. One of the greatest struggles for this child will come in the area of negative thought patterns and refusal to communicate needs before his feelings are hurt. This lack of communication causes the melancholy child to internalize his deep need for approval rather than openly seeking that approval in the manner of the sanguine child. He feels if you really loved him, you would be sensitive to his needs, and he wouldn't have to tell you. Tools to help. 1. Check your child's school to see if testing is available to determine your son or daughter's educational and creative bent. If it is not available, go through a local children's hospital or psychologist. Look for ways to affirm and encourage your child in those areas of his or her own personal expertise, knowing that he probably has some special talent waiting to be discovered. Some children may be gifted in the area of music, the arts, design, or may show an intense interest in a chosen hobby such as photography or model building. 2. Protect your child from too much involvement in sad books, music, or television programs. Because this child has such a vivid visual memory and tendency towards intense reaction, keep him away from disturbing entertainment such as horror movies or films depicting violence or macabre behavior. They're not good for any child, but the melancholy may be seriously affected by trauma dramas. 3. Starting early in childhood, focus the melancholy minds on what they have to be thankful for. Spend some time, at least once or twice a week, having these boys or girls list all the good things God has done for them or given them. It is important to constantly direct their thoughts to the positive rather than the negative. One mother actually has her melancholy son verbalize a praise list every morning with her before she takes him to school, and she has been very pleased with the results. 4. One of the most important things you can do for this temperament is to teach him to communicate his needs and feelings without your having to play 20 questions each time he gets moody. Use every tool you can muster to draw out the thoughts and emotions of this child. Remember, he will be quick to withdraw without ever verbalizing what caused the pain, so be quick to help this child find words to express what he is feeling. Example: Honey, I know there are times when others do or say things that really hurt your feelings. Try to help me understand when I do that to you. If you will stop the moment you feel that pain and just say, Mom, you probably didn't mean to, but you hurt my feelings when you said or did that. It is so much better when we can talk about hurt feelings. Then we don't have to hold that pain inside because we can love away the hurt with a special "I'm sorry" and a big hug. I want to understand when you are hurt because I love you, and I know that talking about these things can keep them from taking away your happiness. 6. It is important to begin early to teach the melancholy child that both success and failure are a part of what our Lord allows in each life in order to make us ready for heaven. This child is terrified of failure and has a difficult time trying anything unless success is guaranteed. He will often spend excess time on preparation to perform a doubtful project. Explain to him that each setback in life gives us compassion for others who are hurting. How could we ever know how they feel if we have never known failure ourselves? Remember, this melancholy child is driven not only by a need for perfection, but also by a desire for you to sense and respond to his needs and feelings without their ever having been verbalized. Teaching this child to communicate needs and feelings is a powerful key to short-circuiting chronic unhappiness and maybe the salvation of a future marriage. Choleric. Your choleric child is the original, strong-willed child, full of energy, adventure, and impatience. This toothless wonder is born to lead. Hard to believe, isn't it? Leadership begins with demanding to eat and to sleep only when he chooses, and moves on to exercising control through temper tantrums. One lady told me her choleric child's first sentence was aloud, "Eat, now." These anger displays seem to express themselves in one of two ways, depending on temperament combination. The choleric sanguines tend to have both verbal and physical temper tantrums. The choleric anger and the sanguine performance, which may include kicking, screaming, and pounding on the floor, wall, whatever is near. Breaking a dish or two is a dramatic addition. The choleric melancholy, however, tends toward a more dignified tantrum. Not wanting to call undue attention to himself, the choleric melancholy child is more likely to hold his breath until turning blue, and then quietly passing out on the floor. This apparent swoon is a quiet attention getter and tells mother not to let this happen again. Control is the key choleric word here, and it follows this child to the grave. Whether it is through leadership or anger, the choleric must be in control. The tantrum gives this child just that. How excited I was when I opened a December USA Today and saw a full-page headline, "Temperament, Not Poor Training, Ignites Tantrums." It's told about a little Jillian who cried all night, threw tantrums daily, and wouldn't eat. Her father, a child psychiatrist, couldn't believe he was involved in a power struggle with a 2-year-old. The more he fought, the worse it got, but Dr. Stanley Turecki did what any psychiatrist in his position would do. He wrote a book about Jillian and others like her. The book is called A Difficult Child. In it, he says, these children aren't spoiled brats. They have difficult traits, but their behavior is a result of their temperament, which they can't help. These children aren't out to get their parents. Dr. Saul Brown of Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles warns parents not to make a scapegoat out of this child. Doing so could lead to possible child abuse. He also tells them to only fight battles that they need to win, not to make a scene out of everything, and not to look for a source to blame for the difficult child's behavior. Some people are just born with different personalities. This little choleric powerhouse is very productive, is able to make quick and competent decisions, and often can outsmart his parents. He is full of confidence and the pride and is often bossy and tactless. Tools to help. 1. You have on your hands the greatest potential for future leadership, positive or negative. Marita's teacher once said, I hope Marita never goes wrong because she would lead the whole school over the cliff with her. Remember that this adventuresome child needs challenge and change. Because of an innate logic, this child will thrive on educational toys, puzzles, and playtimes that allow for expression of leadership. 2. It is important to stand toe-to-toe with this strong-willed child in order to break the will and not the spirit. Phlegmatic Lana Bateman says, "When my choleric son reached 18 months, we squared off for control of the home. For 3 months we battled. I never let him win, not even the battle over bedtime. Because I hung in there, the victory was won, and we never contended over leadership again. Be willing to stand against the will of this child no matter what the cost. You won't be sorry. The rewards are great. If you don't persist, and if you aren't consistent with your discipline and follow through, he will soon be in charge of you." 3. Keep this child busy and give him responsibilities, for this temperament has a deep need to be productive. If he is not in control of something, his room, the dog, the backyard, he will take it out on his friends at school. Cholerics often have poor peer relationships. 4. Be sure to reason sensibly with your choleric child, for he will tend to rebel when discipline or demands lack a logical explanation. He will want to know why before doing what he's told. 5. Respect this child's innate need for fairness and justice, and be open and honest with him, or he will catch you up on your inconsistencies. 6. Use those situations when your choleric child is hurt or disappointed to point out that our Lord will sometimes allow us to experience these struggles in order to give us a compassionate heart towards hurting people who may come to our lives. Since the choleric child is short on mercy and tenderness, it is important to utilize each of their struggles as a teaching tool for these very areas. Don't let them develop the look down on the dummies attitude. Show them that while goals are good, occasional failure is part of life and doesn't mean the person who didn't make it is stupid. Remember, the choleric child's greatest need is to be in control. With that need comes impatient-based anger when things are not going his way. Because the choleric is thinking way ahead of his parents, plotting for control, he will sense when you are most vulnerable and attack. When you have ladies in the living room, he will feel free to eat a dozen cookies, a chance he would not take if you were alone. A young woman came up to me after I spoke on children. "I think my 3-year-old is in control of me." She then told me how the child kept taking cookies while she was visiting a friend. She told the child quietly not to take another one, but she did. After several gentle warnings to no avail, she said sternly, "If you take one more cookie, I'll spank you when we get home." The child looked her in the eye and took one. I asked, "What did you do?" She replied, "Well, I couldn't do anything there in front of my friends." "What did you do when you got home? Did you spank her?" "I forgot." This little imp has got her mother under firm control. She knows the first rule of battle. Attack when the enemy is weak. Don't let this happen to you. On your first disobedience, drag the child off to the bathroom and explain you mean business. If she reaches for one more cookie, remove her again and spank her. Do not worry about your friend's reaction. They are probably delighted to see that you are as strong as a child and that you may have a fighting chance at keeping her from being the child that no one wants to come to their house. It is most important that a choleric's parent provide healthy areas where the child can exercise control while at the same time standing firm and immovable when that need for control supersedes the limits of balance for that child's life and relationships. For instance, the choleric child might be allowed to construct a circus in the backyard and invite friends to come be involved in the performance. He could be encouraged to direct the activities and delegate jobs to the children who want to participate. This would be an opportunity to monitor such things as bossiness or a domineering attitude, and at the same time teach your child to be a wise leader. A choleric child may want to start a children's neighborhood newsletter with tidbits of information about each child living nearby. These are constructive activities that allow the child some healthy control and expression of leadership. However, when that need for control extends itself to defiance, such as refusing to come home when told, or refusing to adhere to an appointed bedtime, then the parent must consistently stand firm. Inconsistency can be fatal with this particular temperament, as he's out to win and will take great pride in outsmarting you. Years ago, when Lauren was in high school, a church friend of mine came to visit and brought her 4-year-old son. When it was time to leave, she called Bobby out of the pool. He pretended not to hear her and continued splashing around. She sighed and said, "He never does a thing I tell him." After a few more feeble attempts that failed, she settled down and stated, "I'll just have to sit here until he decides to get out of the pool." That comment was all Lauren had to hear. She marched over to the edge of the pool and yelled, "Bobby, get out of this pool and do it now." Instantly, Bobby swam to the steps and climbed out. As Lauren wrapped a towel around him, his mother said, "I just can't believe it. He'd never do that for me." He would if he knew she meant business, but this choleric child already has his mother under firm control. Imagine what this undisciplined boy will be like by the time he's 14. Phlegmatic. Your easygoing phlegmatic child with simple goals of sleeping and eating is seldom a problem. Phlegmatics seem to entertain themselves so easily, it takes little to make them happy, and they seem to require minimal care and attention. They are permanent pressed children. Of all infants, this one is the most calm, agreeable, and undemanding. As your phlegmatic child begins to grow, you may notice that he seems to be watching the world go by. That's because watching requires far less energy than getting involved. Because virtually every phlegmatic action is subconsciously evaluated in terms of how much energy it will require, this child finds few activities worth the effort. Television was no doubt invented by a phlegmatic who remembered his childhood longing for a movie he wouldn't have to walk down the street to view. What greater gift could mankind provide than a box which would be entertaining and would allow one to lie down and do nothing but watch? That is phlegmatic heaven, but also a breeding ground for laziness. The phlegmatic child is not an openly rebellious one, but is known to possess a quiet will of iron. This child may smile and agree to do whatever you ask, while inside he knows he has no intention of complying with your request. He may even lie to avoid any form of conflict or contention. He doesn't set out to be dishonest, but if shifting blame will eliminate responsibility, he's willing to take a chance. While your phlegmatic child is a good listener and peacemaker, his indecisiveness and lack of motivation can paralyze him with procrastination and inactivity. A choleric parent cannot understand why this child has no ambition and doesn't want to get on with his life. Tools to help. 1. This temperament has the greatest need to be tested in order to discern areas of interest, creativity, or motivation. This is by far the most difficult child to direct toward a lifetime work, for there is little the phlegmatic can get excited about enough to persist to a positive conclusion. Check for a local child learning center or children's hospital for a testing referral, and don't give up until you have a clear picture of your child's special strengths, both educationally and creatively. 2. This child, of all the temperaments, has the least natural imagination, so begin early in childhood to read him and to stimulate creativity through games of make-believe and mental challenge. 3. Seek to involve this child in sports, tumbling, or dancing in order to encourage physical activity. He may not do well in team sports as he doesn't have much drive, and he may upset the other children when he's dreaming in left field. 4. When the parents of a phlegmatic child seek to eliminate the problem of lying, they must first deal with the root problem, which is not the lie itself, but the fear of conflict. Because of this paralyzing fear, the child will say anything the parent wants to hear, to avoid anger or punishment, and that isn't always the truth. Conflict robs the phlegmatic of peace, so the parent should first control his own anger and then face the child with quiet reason. Once the phlegmatic is taught to deal with conflict in a healthy way, and he is assured you won't yell at him, the need for lying disappears. You need a heavy hand to control the choleric and sometimes the sanguine, but the same strong language will depress the melancholy and overwhelm the phlegmatic. 5. Begin at a very early age to present simple choices to the phlegmatic child. Help him to make decisions on his own and praise him warmly for each one, even if it wouldn't have been your selection. Remember that the phlegmatic's problem with procrastination is based not just on inactivity but indecisiveness as well. He literally does not know which way to turn. The decision-making process is in very low gear in this temperament and must be taught simply, lovingly, and patiently, with much affirmation along the way. Let him choose the dinner menu once a week or select the cookies before his choleric sister has grabbed the Oreos. 6. Your phlegmatic child is the most underdeveloped in the area of expressing anger. Because anger must find some form of expression, it bubbles up a sarcasm in this personality. Sarcasm always hurts some vulnerable victim. The phlegmatic child may exercise a twisted type of control over others through his use of sarcastic humor, and has the ability to make another seem very foolish in the process. Begin at a very early age to explain the link between sarcasm and anger, and how this type of humor can destroy friendships and alienate others. Help this child to find a creative outlet for his repressed anger through talking out his responses to the conflict in an unthreatening environment. Never tell him, "Don't cry, that's for sissies, grow up and be a man." This repression of his inner feelings will accentuate the negative, and if stored up, these hurts will later lash out onto others. Remember, your phlegmatic child is driven by a need for peace and can become physically ill in the face of conflict or contention. When forced to deal with another's anger, the phlegmatic actually loses all thought processes and goes mentally blank. This child has a deep need to feel special to someone, so don't ignore him just because he's not demanding. Value your phlegmatic child and say so. We've talked about the most basic love needs for each child, and we've looked at the temperaments as they relate to childhood personalities. We've even discussed the need to understand each one of our children and the particular strengths and weaknesses that cause him or her to require unique care and nurturing. Scripture has shown us that child rearing using the group technique of treating everyone the same will not meet our children's needs if we are to raise a child up in the way he should go. For further study, thought, and action, spend some family time in teaching your children about the different personalities. Help them find who they really are and don't tell them they are wrong. Any negatives will cut off communications and turn what should be fun into a parental lecture, the dread of all children. Add your children's personality types to your family tree and show them what relatives they resemble temperament-wise. Let them choose a picture of themselves to add to your personality notebook. Restudy this chapter and mark any suggestions that fit a certain child with his initials. Check back often to see how you are doing in training up each child the way he should go. In a group study, share what you have done with this information in your home. Take a quick survey of the personality types for the group's collective children. Those who find they have children that are alike will be able to share helpful tools with each other in the future. The time you spend in thoughtful and prayerful training of your children today may well keep them from being rebellious teens. The understanding of who they really are based on the temperament's tools will give them something to share with their friends who are floundering for some sense of identity. In this day, when permissiveness often leads to confusion, don't be afraid to teach, train, and discipline your children. The rod of correction imparts wisdom, but a child left to itself disgraces his mother. Proverbs 29:15. Chapter 9. How can you bend the twigs as they should go? No one sets out to be a bad parent. No one desires to fail. In that case, how do so many of us end up feeling that we've blown it, that there's no hope? As we grew up, we could so easily see where our parents went wrong. One was too easy, one was too hard. One was fun, one was serious. In our childish wisdom, we vowed we would never be like them. We would never make their mistakes, and yet here we are doing exactly what they did. Even though we didn't mean to, we subconsciously picked up their method of reacting in stressful situations. I was in one home where the young father grabbed the noisy, sanguine child by the ear and pulled him screaming from the room. When I dared ask about this offbeat manner of discipline, he replied, "Well, that's what my father did to me." "Did you like it?" I ventured. "No, I hated it, but you're not supposed to like discipline." This young man had not given any rational thought or fervent prayer over proper methods of discipline. He reacted out of his past and did just what his father had done. Dr. Harold Bloomfield, author of Making Peace with Your Parents, writes, "The relationship of our parents, because it is so fundamental, affects virtually all relationships, including those with our children. Parents often repeat the same objectionable behavior they resented as children. Statistics prove that a large majority of those who were beaten as children, much as they hated it, do the same thing to their children." Marilyn Murray, class staff and abuse therapist, says of the young rapists she's worked with in the prisons, almost all of them were abused in some physical way as children, and they are subconsciously lashing back at their parents by molesting or attacking others. Dr. Bloomfield also says that 90% of the people he counsels have an incomplete relationship with at least one of their parents. Considering that the odds aren't with us that we will be inspired parents properly blending love and discipline, shouldn't we grasp for any help we can find? There are no simple answers, or Paul would have written more specifics than, "Fathers, do not exasperate your children, instead bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord." Ephesians 6:4. While these are surely words of wisdom, you may need more specific advice. As we look at the different personalities relating them to parenting, you will have to fit together the blend you and your mate have, as they are probably not the same. Since the Bible aim is for unity of spirit, you can easily grasp that with two parents who see things from a totally different point of view, harmony is far from automatic. A child does not need to have studied the temperaments to know how to play one parent against the other. He has an inbred sense that says, "Go to sanguine mother when you want fun, but don't be surprised when she forgets to pick you up at school. Melancholy father will be on time, but he'll make you feel guilty for needing a ride. Don't try to pull anything on choleric mother, or she'll let you have it. Test out her mood before you ask for anything. Try to ask phlegmatic dad first, as he'll let you do anything as long as it's quiet and out of sight." Are these not similar to thoughts your children may have? In order to be of one mind, the parents must first understand who they are separately, and then discuss their blending as to how it affects the training of children. The thought of making a job of raising children sounds too much like work to most parents. It's much easier to deal with each emergency as it comes along. That may be true, but think of the confusing signals you are sending your children. There's no consistency, and you encourage them to pit you both against each other, turning family life into a sporting event with opposing teams. Please take the time to examine your temperaments as they relate to parenting, for if you make major mistakes of neglect, indulgence, or abuse, you are affecting other lives and not just your own. Sanguine parents. Sanguine parents are obviously the most fun. The sanguine loves the storytelling, wrestling on the floor years of a child's life, and of all parents is the most free to play with the children. Sanguine parents elicit laughter and squeals of delight as they read or tell childhood stories and often act them out. I memorized green eggs and ham, then taught it to children so we could perform it in choral speaking at the drop of a Cat in the Hat. It's no surprise that this parent is best liked by the children's peers. What other parent can turn a house into a circus and a disaster into a hilarious story? Paula Lively of Dallas is the most perfect sanguine I've ever met. She's adorable, has huge expressive eyes, and captures that youthful, innocent look that is ageless in sanguines. Her husband Fred is a classic choleric melancholy who by living with her has developed a reflective sense of humor. She wrote to tell me how understanding the temperaments had helped her as both wife and mother. By the time Monday afternoon had come, I was so tired of washing 16 loads of clothes. Not really, only 4. Fred had a meeting and wouldn't be home for dinner, so I didn't want to cook. Carrie and Jim were begging me to make pizza, so I decided the quickest way to get out of this work was to make them do it. My children, even at age 10, are totally self-sufficient, do their own beds, can wash their clothes, prepare recipes, on and on. Realizing they would be much more willing to make pizza themselves if it were fun, I decided to have a pizza-making contest. The winner, most creative and best cleanup, who cares what it tasted like, wins a $2.50 shopping spree at the 5 and 10 store. There are still some bargains at M.E. Moses. Jim, my precious and thoughtful melancholy choleric son, made a pepperoni with perfect rows, I mean perfect, of mushrooms carefully arranged with all the stems turned in towards the center so as to achieve the sunburst effect. Are you ready for this one? Our sanguine choleric daughter, Carrie, topped the pepperoni pizza by making a sausage pizza with the head of a Maillard duck in the center. We collect Mallards, so she knew that they would sway the judge. She chopped up a green pepper and somehow very creatively filled in the sausage duck with bell pepper for color. The beak was made of crushed Doritos, and the breast feathers were strips of bacon. When I came into the kitchen for the judging, I immediately became hysterical at my own textbook case of a sanguine turning work into fun, and my children's textbook cases of being so classic, practically right off the pages of Personality Plus. We invited the Japanese neighbors from across the street and the Orthodox Jewish neighbors from next door. They didn't eat, but enjoyed the company. Fred came home and was so upset because he'd missed the party that he went into a depression. Not really. Oh, what fun. Don't you wish Paula had been your mother? There are, however, problem areas of parenting even for the Santa Claus personality. Because it isn't too fun to be consistent, the sanguine is often a permissive parent. Setting standards for behavior and enforcing them is not something the sanguine mom or dad does easily, and equally painful is the prospect of facing rejection from the offspring. Yes, the sanguines even need to be accepted by their children, and let's face it, structuring healthy behavior and discipline in one's children doesn't put a parent in a popular position. When the children become teens, the sanguine parent may look for ways to escape the increased demands and responsibility. Sports, social functions, the country club, even a fun job can become excuses for not spending time at home. When the fun-loving, disorganized sanguine can't be bothered by the details of keeping up with appointments or getting the children where they need to be on time, the more responsible parent, usually a melancholy, has to be the family manager, sighing with martyrdom while doing it. Your mother would lose her head if it weren't attached. Or, your father never knows which end is up. This struggle may not be quite so radical if the sanguine's secondary temperament is choleric, bringing a more responsible and organized balance to the personality. It is truly amazing how quickly the sanguine parent disappears when the children become demanding or aren't fun anymore. This retreat can cause the spouse to feel like he or she is raising a single-parent family with the questionable help of a drop-in playmate now and then to provide entertainment. One area that is troublesome for the child of a sanguine is that of competition where friends are involved. Often there is some jealousy when the child's friends seem drawn to the sanguine parent more than they enjoy spending time with the child they came to visit. This type of personality competition can become more severe as the years pass and dates arrive at the front door to be charmed away by the sanguine mother. The combination choleric-sanguine seems to be the parent most enjoyed and accepted by children growing up, for they have the sanguine magnetism and yet know how to lead effectively and accomplish something when properly motivated by potential praise. Often the sanguine choleric mother, who has trouble getting a simple dinner on the table at a consistent time, can produce instant banquets for crowds of cheering teenagers. While this excited mother is accepting the accolades of the youth, her melancholy husband comes home to find a circus with his wife as the cooking ringmaster. Instead of joining in the fun with her, he tends to take her talents as a personal affront, wondering why she can't get this enthusiastic over cooking for him, not understanding that if he gave her a standing ovation for each steak, she might grill one more often. He can't tolerate the noise of the crowd, so he withdraws to his room, waiting for her to come and soothe his hurt feelings. Since she's insensitive to his needs and wouldn't leave the party anyway, she shrugs and asks, "I wonder what's wrong with your father tonight." Waiting alone for sympathy that doesn't arrive shows the husband that his evaluation was right. She doesn't really love me. In fact, she cares more for that bunch of strangers than for her own husband. He sinks into a deep depression, doesn't speak to her for 2 weeks, and she has no idea why. What a lot of hassle we can be spared when we understand why we behave as we do. The father in this case can save himself heartbreak if he knows her cooking for the crowd has no bearing on her love for him. Even if he told her how hurt he was, she would not have the sensitivity to understand and would call the whole idea ridiculous. He should join in with the gang and force himself to have a good time or greet everyone and retreat with a positive attitude. If the melancholy does not have the authority to handle the situation, we could hope the sanguine wife could develop an awareness of his needs and lovingly take a tray of food to his room. An improvement on either side would make a difference in the harmony of the home. Because sanguine cholerics are able to combine goals with fun, they make excellent youth leaders and can influence questioning teens in a positive and godly direction. I was in one church where the youth pastor was a straight sanguine, charm without discipline. He had taken 50 youth for a hike in the mountains to return at 5:30 p.m. at the church. Parents were sitting in cars waiting, and no one came. The pastor was called, and 2 hours later the police. At 8 p.m., the group arrived happy and singing. They'd had a great time, and no one, including the youth pastor, had any idea what time it was. Melancholy parents. The melancholy is a dutiful, responsible parent who will often try to expose the children to piano, trumpet, dancing, art, or other cultural pursuits. Because melancholy sets such high standards, they usually press for intellectual achievement as well, and long for a child to appreciate the deeper things of life. They read them poetry, listen to classical music, and get them to their lessons on time. Fred and I were recently the guests of Dr. and Mrs. Hans Deal. Mrs. Deal holds a doctorate in musical arts and is an accomplished concert pianist who performs all over the country, and Hans is both a doctor and a lecturer on nutrition. The grand piano filled a large section of their living room, and next to it, under a spotlight, were 2 chairs, each with a violin leaning against them. Mrs. Deal explained that the instruments were left out at all times to encourage their 2 children, Byron, age 10, and Carmen, age 8, to play their violins whenever they wanted to. Their violins should be their friends. After dinner, we found out these 2 precocious, talented children were dear friends with the violins, as they gave us an astonishing concert. Byron also played duets with his mother on the piano, not little plodding numbers like Row, Row, Row Your Boat, but sonatas by Schubert and Mozart. I was so overwhelmed with the depth of talent and the obvious loving care that the parents had given these 2 brilliant children, that I suddenly felt like a laggard. My mother had been a violin and cello teacher. Where had I gone wrong? I remember my mother trying to teach 10-year-old Marita the violin. Somehow just seeing her hold the instrument in her hand was hilarious. Each time she picked it up to practice, we all laughed so hard we cried. She was somewhat a child's version of Jack Benny. As I listened to Byron and Carmen performing so effortlessly, I wondered, would Marita have been a violinist today if I'd been a melancholy mother? Unfortunately, the melancholy's child may be overwhelmed and discouraged if the parent sets the standards too high, and consistently puts those goals beyond the children's reach. Such a child would feel as if he could never do enough to please the melancholy parent, for indeed nothing is quite good enough. It is of paramount importance that the melancholy parent learn to set the standards at a reachable level for the child to experience feelings of accomplishment, and to realize that unless the child is also a melancholy, he may not be able to achieve what the parent desires. This understanding alone can be such a healing instrument in those parent-child relationships. Some parents with this melancholy temperament will subconsciously choose an opposite-sex child to be a special companion. Generally, the melancholy has become badly disenchanted by inability to conform his spouse to the image he has of a perfect wife, and will then move on to the more flexible material of a child. This parent will tend to draw that little one out of a child's world and into an early adult one by sharing everything from emotional struggles or disencouragements to business problems or failures. Without realizing what is happening, the parent robs the child of a childhood and draws him into an adult world of problems, pressures, and emotions. The parent feels he's giving this child special attention and can't possibly see that what he's doing is causing future emotional problems. Eventually, the child reaches adulthood, but not without an elusive root of bitterness and anger due to that lost childhood. Eventually, those feelings will surface in a negative or resentful way, and the parent will place the blame on the child. I can't imagine why she turned against me after all the love I've given her. Lana Bateman tells of one such situation that was presented to her for prayer counseling. A lovely choleric melancholy lady named Terry came to see me complaining of marriage problems. She didn't believe that her husband loved her, but when I asked her to explain his actions toward her, she told a different story. He sounded like a gentle, caring husband who longed for his wife to be herself and not to put unhealthy worth in him. As we talked, I found that this young woman grew up with a melancholy father who made her his companion from her first breath. He told her of his hopes, dreams, inventions, disappointments, and struggles. He drew her into his world of business and emotions. She lost her real identity and became the extension of a great man. She also lost her childhood as he opened his world with all of its stresses to her. Because this father didn't know how to give healthy love, Terry had to redefine love in terms of what he was able to give. Love became an aspiration to carry on his greatness. Love became being that extension of a man who would constantly push you on to bigger and better achievements. It is no surprise that this young woman couldn't accept healthy love from her husband. He just wanted her to be herself and not an extension of her father. She had never experienced such a strange attitude. He must not love her. Her idea of what love really was had been so distorted by the melancholy parent who made her a substitute wife that she couldn't perceive genuine love when it was presented to her. This distortion almost destroyed her marriage and took several years to successfully grow beyond. While this relationship problem certainly doesn't exist for all melancholies, it does occur with some frequency among those who may have experienced painful childhoods. This is an area for preventative prayer if a parent with this temperament finds himself seriously favoring and spending time with one particular child. The melancholy mother with sanguine children has difficulty realizing the value of laughter for these little ones. They will work to make the mother happy, and if mother responds, they will be overjoyed. I can remember how my father, two brothers, and I would do everything we could to amuse my phlegmatic, melancholy mother, who would just sigh and say to my father, "If you don't stop teaching them all these tomfool things, they will never amount to a row of pins." Every once in a while, we'd get to mother and she'd really laugh. These were high points in our childhood. So melancholy mothers realize life may be difficult, but a laugh here and there may help. A woman from Texas wrote me this following letter. "I have just finished reading your book, Personality Plus, and wanted to tell you how very much I enjoyed it and how helpful I found it to be. I met the true test of enjoyable as my mainly melancholy temperament, with much phlegmatic, rarely is moved to laugh out loud. Your delightful illustrations were so true to life that I repeatedly found myself laughing with deep ha-ha-has. My precious sanguine 4-year-old daughter had no idea what I was laughing at, but delighted for the chance to laugh and have some fun. Would laugh in high volume unison. And once she even brought me the book saying, 'Here, Mommy, let's read your book and laugh together.' But the laughter was a fringe benefit. The main thing I thank you for is the understanding this book has given me. My husband has always believed that everything would be all right if she just loosened up, while I, on the other hand, have had trouble even believing that someone would hang a picture without measuring the wall. Reading to my daughters yesterday P.D. Eastman, The Best Nest, a delightful children's book, I found myself chuckling to discover why Mr. and Mrs. Bird kept relocating their nest. Poor Mr. Bird, phlegmatic, contented, prodded on by his choleric Mrs. Bird. Even the illustrations prove the theory. She looks bossy. Linda Klatt. Some melancholies are hampered during their parenting years by constant bouts with depression, while others battle the syndrome of martyrdom. While it is true that any temperament can fall prey to the beast of martyrdom, the melancholy is by far the most susceptible. This forces us to take a closer look at the most self-sacrificing temperament for an understanding of its vulnerability. The melancholy may suffer from one of two different types of martyrmania. The first is called the overt martyr. This type of martyr is constantly verbalizing all he has done for the children. The overt martyr might sound something like this: "Don't you care how hard I have to work to give you what you have?" Or, "I never get any time to myself. All I ever do is work my fingers to the bone, and this is the thanks I get?" Obviously, this type of emotional unloading produces a burden of guilt in the child. The second type of melancholy martyr is called a subtle martyr. The subtle martyr seldom, if ever, verbalizes his or her self-sacrifice, but simply pours out a life on the altar of the children's needs. The subtle martyr's children may spend a lifetime watching the parent pick up after them, clean their rooms, and in some extreme cases even do their homework. This type of martyr will give all to the child, even when it is extremely unwise to do so. Such a parent will often sacrifice his own needs to buy for the child without ever verbalizing the personal cost. The child of the subtle martyr will feel tremendous guilt, but the guilt will be on a subconscious level. Just as the martyrdom of the parent is subtle or hidden from open understanding, so is the guilt of the children hidden away in the subconscious mind. The only touch such a child might have with that elusive pressure might be a sense of needing to spend a lifetime repaying the parent for that which no one can explain. The child might verbalize it this way: "I'll never be able to do enough to pay my mom or dad back for all they've done. I try so hard and it never seems to be enough. Why do I always feel guilty?" We're beginning to see that while the melancholy is a dependable, concerned parent, they are definitely troubled areas in the parent-child relationship. The melancholy is one of two controlling personalities, second only to the choleric. Perhaps in a quiet way, the melancholy is the most controlling of all. This temperament can do more damage with eye-rolling, looks of disappointment, and deep sighs that all of the other temperaments can do with 1,000 words. This is a powerful and subtle control, and makes the child feel guilty, inadequate, and smothered all at the same time. When the melancholy lets these tendencies get out of hand, a child will pull hard and fast to get away from home, and in adulthood many will effectively distance themselves from melancholy parents, who will keep to their friends and self-pity. Choleric parents. The choleric parent is dutiful and responsible and will virtually never forget where the child needs to be or when he needs to be there. A choleric exerts sound leadership in the home and invariably has the right answer for every question a child might ask. Not only does the choleric establish goals for his children, but has no trouble moving the whole family to action. The choleric can be counted on to organize and perform what is necessary to meet the needs of his children in almost every area except that of emotions. Since the choleric looks upon people who cry as weak, he transmits to his children that they should not let their feelings show. Like the melancholy, the choleric must maintain absolute control of his children. While the melancholy controls emotionally, the choleric controls openly and is known as the aggressive temperament. His children learn that there is only one way to behave, and many put on phlegmatic masks of submission, hiding their real personality even from themselves. Another area of struggle for the choleric parent-child relationship is that of quality time spent together. The choleric is often a workaholic, and assumes if he makes a good living, that's all that should be expected of him. When the choleric is home, he demands constant productivity from children, and gives them little time to relax. One lady told me she had been raised on a farm, and once a week they all went to town to a drive-in movie. Her choleric mother could not let them waste time, and so the children would all sit in the back of the pickup truck and husk corn, string beans, or shell peas while watching Snow White. Their choleric motto is, "Never let them rest." Productivity is next to godliness. Sadly, the choleric would rather do a task himself than put up with what is conceived as poor performance by a child. Unfortunately, there is no other way but the choleric's way, and this can wipe out a child who needs so badly to learn from an open and patient teacher and be allowed to make mistakes. Often the choleric parent will grab the project out of the child's hand and say, "I knew I should have done this myself." A comment such as this devastates the child and signals to him he is incompetent. Later, when this parent says, "What's the matter with you, stupid?" the child confirms in his mind that he is worthless. This type of parental behavior is so frequent with cholerics that I often see very successful men whose children have all turned out to be failures. They can't understand how this happened when they gave them every opportunity in the world to succeed. A millionaire who came to a Personality Plus seminar took me afterwards to see his new private airplane. When we were alone, he told me a typical story of his son. The young man had been given every advantage imaginable and had doors open to him that the average person could never hope to enter. He'd done poorly in school and seemed inept in the family business. "Have you sent him out on his own?" I asked. "Oh, yes. And that was a fiasco. He ruined both a family and a business while he was gone, and I had no choice but to bring him back home and support him. He wants to be rich, but he has no idea of how to work." The man dropped his head and calmed his anger. "After listening to you today, I can see I'm a choleric, and I guess I did all the wrong things as a parent." It is so hard, close to impossible, for a choleric to see that his drive and supposed inspiration make a child feel worthless. "What's the use? I'll never make it anyhow." Sometimes a choleric child will determine to show his father up, but in his angry pursuit, he overshoots the mark and fails. He may come home subdued like the prodigal son, or sink into a way of life that brings shame onto his parents. This negative lifestyle seems to be the only way he can exert control and win. He's no longer in competition, and he's caused his father to have a heart attack. Teens who have lived under a strong choleric parent and who know they can never be what Superdad or Supermom want them to be tend to become depressed. Parents are always stunned when smart children from good homes suddenly commit suicide for no good reason. If you are a choleric parent, be brave enough to sit down with your children and ask them if you are somewhat like these parents I've described. Watch their body language as well as their words, as they may be too afraid to tell the truth. The choleric parent quickly becomes impatient with a child's immature decision-making abilities, so he makes all the child's decisions. This problem area, coupled with a demanding, unemotional, domineering personality, can crush and wound a young child's sensitive spirit and produce rebellion in an older youth, making them unable to decide on anything in life. Lana Bateman tells of an experience with her son. "Our phlegmatic son Rob was in from college. He had done something that was thoughtless, and his dad responded out of choleric impatience with volatile anger. This resulted in Rob's being embarrassed in front of a friend who was present. After the natural instincts of that choleric had been communicated, God began to press Mark's heart and show him that while he had stated a valuable principle to his son, the message would be lost amidst the embarrassment of calling him down in anger before his friend. God showed Mark that while his words were wisdom, his manner of expressing them destroyed their influence. Mark got up out of bed that night, got dressed, and went upstairs to apologize to Rob in the presence of his friend. What a beautiful illustration of what God can do to overcome our natural temperament weaknesses if we will just be open to Him and desire to please Him in our parenting. God longs to deal with the destructive parts of our personalities, and for the choleric, rash anger is often at the top of this list. One memory a child has difficulty releasing is the sensation of a parent's anger, which seems to have a profound and lasting effect on a young mind. If you are a choleric parent, do not give up in disgust and brand yourself a failure. You have probably not done many of these things yourself, but the tendency is surely there, and you must take caution not to wipe out the needed ego strength of your child. You have a strength other parents covet. You can get more accomplished in a shorter time than anyone else, but relax. Take the pressure off the home front, and let them see the charm you exhibit when out in the world. If your son never wins a game pitching for Little League, it won't matter if you let him know you love him as he is, with or without winning games. But if he wins 9 out of 10 and you ask why he didn't win the 10th, his whole season will become a wipeout. Motivate, encourage, and inspire, but don't dominate and put the family on an endless treadmill experience. Phlegmatic parent. The phlegmatic's peaceful personality has a way of stabilizing children. Little ones have a need for a routine in their lives, and the phlegmatic is a person who will thrive on that very thing, for they don't like change and don't feel a need to be unnecessarily creative. That easygoing quality of this temperament makes them calm, accepting parents who don't get upset easily and always seem to have time for children. The phlegmatic mother will put playing with the children ahead of cleaning the house. There are, however, certain drawbacks for the phlegmatic parent, just as there are with the other three temperaments we've already discussed. The phlegmatic tends to be a permissive parent in order to avoid conflict. Duty and responsibility are not the words in the phlegmatic vocabulary, and he or she often takes the easy road. Since the phlegmatic does not like to be told what to do because of the underlying stubborn streak, the pressures of responsibility are most easily left to the choleric, whom the phlegmatic usually marries. Children of a phlegmatic often see this parent as lazy and weak, and feel he or she is unwilling to defend himself in time of conflict. It is important that this attitude be faced if the phlegmatic is confronted by a child approaching adulthood. One choleric young man went to his mother and complained bitterly that she was weak and let Dad run over her. It was obvious that this boy was taking up the offense for his mother, but unfortunately for him, he had not properly perceived the relationship between his parents. This was his mother's response. "You don't seem to understand, son. When an issue truly matters to me, I will work it through with your dad. Most things just don't matter that much. Why should I have it my way when the outcome means so little to me? And why shouldn't we do it his way when it means so much to him?" This young man finally began to realize a temperament truth where his mother was concerned. She really didn't care. He was wasting his frustration on a situation that didn't really exist. He was able, at last, to lay down the emotional responsibility of protecting his mom. She may have appeared to be vulnerable, but she wasn't quite as helpless as he had thought. Another type of family struggle may occur because of the phlegmatic parent's tendency toward being somewhat slow or lazy. Children may witness parental conflict over lack of organization and caring for both home and children. A phlegmatic father might neglect to get the bills paid or necessary house repairs accomplished. A phlegmatic mother may not get the Christmas decorations put away until Easter looms on the horizon. Although the phlegmatic has the ability to accomplish these tasks, we must remember that this personality evaluates almost everything in subconscious terms of how much energy it will take, up to and including the raising of children. Unfortunately, this parent can often be found in front of the television set doing what comes most naturally, watching. While the phlegmatic parent is the most easygoing and unpressured, he must make the major effort to get what needs to be done finished on time and to get out of the chair and discipline the children. For further study, thought, and action. Because parenting is such a serious subject, you should take time to sit down with your mate and list your individual strengths and weaknesses as parents. Look at the different approaches you have to discipline because of your temperaments. See where your conflicts are. Do your children pit one of you against the other? Does one of you always give in? Is one of you the easy mark? As Fred and I were raising our children, we had a simple rule. Whichever one of us was asked first gave the answer, and that was it. There was no running to the other parent for a second opinion. This eliminated bartering and established unity. As you list your differences as parents in your personality notebook, discuss each one and begin to make some basic rules for each one of you to follow. To win as parents, you both must be on the same team, not opposing sides. You must be playing the same game with the same set of instructions. Even young children know that when there is no unity between the parents, and they begin early to work the moods of their mother and avoid the anger of their father. In your group study, bring in articles and case histories about teen depression and suicide. Notice what characteristics these disheartened teens have in common. Read my chapters on teen depression, one in Lives on the Mend, and one in Blow Away the Black Clouds, revised edition. Discuss the causes of teen depression listed in these sources, and consider those which might apply to any of your children. Has there been divorce or death in the family, giving them a feeling of rejection? Have there been frequent moves causing instability? Have there been illnesses, deprivation, or traumas leading to fears? Have your children watched frightening or explicit TV? Do they play Dungeons and Dragons? Do they have friends who take drugs? As you go over these and other questions in your study group, make some basic policies of parenting that you all agree on. Make this a beginning for your whole church to take a new interest in raising up their children under godly, practical principles. Parents are desperate for help today. Why not be the catalyst for a unified approach to child raising in your church and community? If you are a single parent, it is even more important that you initiate a group with similar problems that may work together for positive solutions. Fathers, do not exasperate your children, instead bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Ephesians 6:4.